Well, I'm definitely glad to get started because as you can see, here I am. Where am I, you might ask? That's right. I am at your landfill. Yeah, you. And it's hot, and there are bugs, and there are birds everywhere. And I almost got hit by that bulldozer earlier, but I'm here for a reason. It's because it's all here. There's that sandwich you threw away last week. The sock with the holes in it, I see it. There it is right there. I even see the couch you threw away so many years ago. It's crazy. We live in this weird modular world of luxury. Every week, a truck comes by and takes all of our waste away forever. You don't want it anymore? Well, toss it in the bin. Forget about it. But that's not where it ends. It comes here, and it sits, and it waits. I'm here today to help you cut down on what you send to the landfill. A good portion of what you throw away can actually be used productively. It can be used for good rather than evil. Now, we're all here to learn about composting, and I am so thankful for you and that you came. So let's work together, see if we can keep this pile behind me from growing any larger. Let's get started. Everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so my name is Kevin Lehman. I will be your host for this webinar. I'm with the Government Solutions Practice at Capgemini in DC, but more relevant to today, I am a leader with the CARE Sustainability Council, which we'll go into in a little bit. Now, you're all here to learn about composting. Well, we're all here to learn about composting. Some of you might be composting already, and I definitely hope that's the case. But everyone here, myself included, is going to learn something about how it works and why it matters. But most importantly, for those of you that are not composting, you're going to learn how you can get started. Whether you're in a studio in the city or a family house out in the suburbs, we've got you covered. The agenda for today, we're going to go into some introductions. We want to go over what is happening in the landfills themselves. We also want to go over what the basics of composting are, how to compost, and of course, Sarah's thesis for her PhD is about insects and composting, so we're going to get a little too deep into that, but we'll find that later. Then we're going to go over the social media challenge, which I'm very excited about. It should be fun. We're going to go through some pre-scripted questions that I took polls from family members and friends and colleagues, and we're going to get some of those going just to get the information flowing, and then we're going to leave it open for all of you guys in any Q&A you might have. So first, I'd like to introduce you all to the CARE Sustainability Council, the CSC. It was started over a year ago with just some informal discussions, and it has twisted and evolved into something I am very proud to unveil today. We will be the sustainability arm for the CARES ERG. Now, we're a small group. There's about 6 of us at the moment, but we are dedicated to helping give access to the resources, the events, the networking opportunities for our colleagues, both in CARES and all over Capgemini. We will have a Teams page up and running soon. For anyone passionate about saving the planet, you can join this, and it'll have access to all of the resources you're looking for. And also keep an eye on your emails because we will be looking for future council members as we grow and expand. So keep an eye out for that. And finally, I would like to introduce our guest for today, Sarah Koo. She is a PhD candidate at Georgia State with a focus on sustainability through food waste. And I'm very excited for today because this event has been months in the making. And honestly, every time Sarah and I get into a conversation, we get into the weeds of composting and sustainability. And I have to tell her to stop and save it for the presentation. So finally, today is the day. And with that, I am excited to pass the mic on to Sarah.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you all at Capgemini for having me on this session today. I'm very excited to talk with you all and to share some things with you that hopefully will be new, and hopefully you'll learn a few things. And so with that, we can get started. So as you saw, Kevin was standing in a landfill earlier, and what you guys might be wondering why this is bad. Now that might be, maybe that's not important to talk about because maybe you all already understand that. But just to sort of reiterate and reemphasize the fact that landfills are not the best way to be disposing of our organic waste. Waste in general, but my personal specialty is through organic and food material. And so what happens is that, you know, when you throw trash away, that trash consists of like Kevin said, your socks, food, couches, things like that. Lots of things that all basically get combined together and buried into the ground. Now, landfills have liners, but there are no liners that are 100% effective in keeping out leachate or contaminants from going into the ground, into the water. And there's also, unless it's intentionally designed and specifically designed to be able to harness the greenhouse gases that are being emitted, those greenhouse gases are going back out into the world and are dangerous for our planet. And so that's sort of depressing information, but what's nice is that there are actually wonderful alternatives and opportunities for alternatives for where this waste can go. And so we'll talk about that today. We can switch. Yeah. So you guys might be wondering, so why is food waste even a problem? Because food biodegrades, right? It can break down into the ground. And so what's so bad about it? And so some issues are 40% of the food that we produce every year is wasted, either thrown into a landfill or discarded informally on the street. This food is being wasted. Now, what that says is that food waste is not so much an issue. We don't have a problem with producing waste, but we do have a problem with logistically getting it to better places than through a landfill. And the reality is that that many Americans and many people in the world are malnourished or are starving every day. And so, again, it's a problem of we're not able to get to connect these sort of avenues to be able to get food to the right places and to the places that it will be most effective. Additionally, methane is up to 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide gets a lot of attention in the news. Because it is the most prevalent greenhouse gas, but methane is actually much more potent than carbon dioxide, and food waste is a significant contributor to methane emissions in this world. So if you guys can see the chart that is on the right, that is outlined through the United States Environmental Protection Agency, that's a food waste recovery hierarchy. And so it's sort of the ultimate goal for food waste is to just not have it in the first place, and that sort of goes along with lean operations and things like that to make sure that we're not basically producing a surplus that we can't utilize. But in my mind, food is a sustainable, renewable, and abundant resource as long as it's produced sustainably and responsibly. And now we can't use the traditional agricultural methods that we have been using. We need to be using some innovative techniques like aquaponics, urban farming, rooftop gardening, things like that. There are ways that we can produce food more sustainably. But from there, it's important to recover food for human consumption. So that can happen through donations. And that's when I say food recovery, it refers to feeding hungry people, feeding people through food donations. Now, from there, from feeding people and landfilling, there are a few other options. It's feeding animals, industrial uses, and composting, which is what we'll focus on today. And sort of my research involves everything that happens between feeding hungry people and landfilling, because there are lots of opportunities that are basically not being taken advantage of. And so I want to stress the importance of being able to utilize food as a resource through some of these other avenues. And what we're going to be talking about today is through composting. Again, I just want to reiterate, being biodegradable doesn't necessarily mean it's benign. So it can still impact the planet, like through methane. But if we're able to harness that and use biodegradable materials in an efficient way, then that's ultimately going to be producing the best outcomes. So with that, we can hop over to the next slide. So you all might be asking, what can I do every day? And ultimately, the first thing that we need to do is to separate out our food waste from our other trash. Now, I don't know how many of you all participate in recycling or who have recycling capabilities. I know that can vary depending on where you live or the type of situation that you have. But between recyclable materials and food waste, there's actually very little left over. that needs to go into a landfill. But it requires effort. It requires conscious and intentional actions to separate out food and organic material from your waste. And so we're going to talk about how to do that. And so what you can do first before even composting is to utilize it. Things like coffee grounds are actually great for fertilizer as well as for exfoliation. But you do have to worry about it clogging up your drains. So I encourage you, if you do that, to do it in your kitchen sink so that you can put it down the garbage disposal, which again can have issues in and of itself if you do that too much, but we're not going to get into some of the other details on this. Like Kevin said, I tend to talk about this quite a bit and can be long-winded in my answers. And so without trying to make this a 3-hour-long session, I'm going to try to keep it short. But I personally save my food scraps for to make veggie stock. What I do is I take my onion skins and pepper stems and things like that, and accumulate them in a bag in the freezer or a Tupperware container in the freezer. And when that gets full, I make veggie stock or bone broth. So there's lots of things that you can do with your food scraps before even composting. But from there's lots of things that, if you have moldy food or if something cannot be used for other uses, then you can compost it. And it's a great project to do with kids. It's a fun activity to do, especially now that kids are all home now. But even if you don't have kids, it's just a fun thing to do. So let's talk about how to get started with that. So you all might be wondering, I don't know how familiar you are with composting, but composting involves a balance of green and brown material. Now, when I say that, when I say green material, what that means is food waste or fresh yard trimmings or clippings, anything that's sort of live, that is green material. And brown material is your carbon material. So that's things like shredded paper, dried leaves, and every compost system needs a balance of greens and browns in combination with temperature, air, and moisture in order to be effective and work properly. And there's some things that, different systems have different sort of abilities in terms of figuring out the balance and the levels that are required. But I know that this is, it can be overwhelming because there's a lot of things going on. And so I wish that I had a solution for you in the sense of, you watch a video and you'll know everything that you need to know about composting, or you read a book and you'll know everything you need to know about composting. The reality is that in order to live a sustainable and responsible life, it takes effort and it takes some education and some learning. And so I encourage you, hopefully this webinar will inspire you to look a little bit more into composting and the things that you can do individually, because as you guys might imagine, I can't cover it all in an hour. And so, but I hope it inspires you all to, further this conversation and this education to figure out some things that you can do yourself to learn more about this. But we'll go on to the next slide. So in terms of composting, like I was talking about before, in terms of the greens and browns and temperature, moisture, and air, there's lots of different methods on how to make compost happen. And so you can do it through heaps, through just piles. You can dig holes in the backyard and do it. You can have bins that are specific for composting. You can even do composting through vermiculture, which is through worms, and that can even be done indoors. And I'm happy to talk more about that in detail with you one-on-one if you're interested in doing something like that. It's very easy to set up. Windrow and in-vessel composting tend to be done on a more large scale for industrial purposes because it requires more land and it's sort of more cost intense. But there are lots of composting methods. These are only a handful. We'll showcase a couple of other ones a little bit later on. But some other alternatives to composting, just sort of want to do some honorable mentions here. If any of you do live in a more rural area, you might have chickens yourself or have neighbors who have chickens or who have farms. These animals love food scraps, and that's a great alternative to composting. And also an alternative to landfilling is to use it for animal feed. Or if you've got pets at home, a lot of animals love food scraps, so that's an option there. Black soldier fly larvae are a type of insect that are native to North America as well as other parts of the world, and I'll talk about that more in detail a little bit later. But just want to let you all know that insect processing is a possibility of how to do food waste recycling as well. And things like anaerobic digestion, incineration, and pyrolysis are also options. Now, you all might not be familiar with those terms, but anaerobic digestion, just real quick, anaerobic means without oxygen. And so it's basically when anaerobic digestion happens, it requires sort of a facility specifically to do it. There are small-scale anaerobic digesters that are available, but mainly when we talk about anaerobic digestion, it happens in a big sort of facility like a landfill, but it's basically a more controlled setting that harnesses the methane and the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming out, and the leachate, the sort of byproduct that comes from a very controlled degradation of food waste without the presence of oxygen. And what that basically does is just harness it for energy, for electricity, things like that. Incineration could do the same thing. That's essentially just burning trash. And pyrolysis is basically burning trash without oxygen. And so there's lots of different options, lots of different things. There's pros and cons to everything. But again, we're going to talk about composting here, but just wanted to give some honorable mentions and some, just in case you guys are curious about some of the alternatives to composting and to landfilling. Those are some of the alternatives. Now, why composting matters, we talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of, landfills we want to, of course, minimize landfill, what goes into landfills. We're running out of space on this earth, quite honestly, to do landfills everywhere. And in the past, it's been the cheap default way to deal with our waste because land was cheap in this country, especially depending on where you live. Now, in places like California, they've actually mandated in San Francisco that organic waste is separated out from your trash because they realized that is an important thing to keep food waste and organic matter out of landfills because it has tremendous amount of use for energy and for other applications, and so keeping it out of landfill is very important. We talked about greenhouse gas emissions, and what I want to basically stress on this slide is that composting actually provides more jobs than landfilling and then through incinerators. And there's also been some research that has shown that millennials and other individuals in some of the younger generations are more interested in working for a company that is that deals with sustainability, or that does things that are good in terms of corporate social responsibility, that are willing to take pay cuts for those kinds of jobs that are much more meaningful and that can provide a sense of integrity for the individual employees. And so that's another thing I want to stress, that composting can help with those issues as well. And also, compost can filter out pollutants. Now, again, without getting too deep into it, I do want to stress that compost in and of itself is not a magic cure-all for everything. There can be contamination, in particular heavy metals of lead, in compost, depending on how it is created. And so I don't want to perpetuate a false narrative that compost can fix everything, but it's a good place to start. And again, we can talk about these things in more detail offline or in a different setting. And I don't want to overwhelm you guys. I know we're already in a pandemic situation. We already have a ton of social justice issues going on, and I don't want to overwhelm, with too much information, but I just want to sort of be transparent about the fact that, composting doesn't only have pros, it has cons as well. But for purposes of this webinar, I just want to sort of stress what you can do for composting because the majority of it is very good. So we can switch over to the next slide. So how do you individually compost? I was just talking with Catherine before this officially started, and she lives in an apartment complex, as do I. And so we don't have yards to be able to compost in a backyard per se. And so what can we do? There's lots of different ways. And again, without overwhelming you, just want to have these slides will be available to you all. And also, if you just Google how do I compost, you'll get lots of different infographics and flowcharts and things like this to be able to use as a resource. But just to sort of quickly go through, I don't live in a place where I can compost myself and have my own system. And so what I do, and what you all can do if you live in a place that doesn't have a yard, you can use a community garden to do composting. A lot of times, especially in an urban setting, there are community gardens that exist in different neighborhoods, and that's something, again, you can just look up in Google to find out if there's a community garden around where you live. And sometimes they require sort of participation fees, like or subscription fees, to be able to maintain things. Now, I actually don't pay anything in my community garden that's just 2 blocks away from me. But what I do is I volunteer my time for any time that it needs to be turned, or they need help with things. They can contact me and I'll come over and help with that. And that's sort of how I contribute to, in exchange, to use their composting systems. And what they have is just a tumbler, then sort of a 3-bin system, and that's how they do it. But like Kevin uses a community garden composting, and they have a slightly different method. We just want to sort of showcase through this chart, as well as the chart on the next slide, that there are ways that you yourself can compost, no matter what kind of setting that you are in, no matter what kind of living situation you're in. So Kevin, do we want to go through your parents' option of how they can compost to see an alternative to an apartment? Kevin, I think you're muted. Kev.
Yes, good.
Yep.
We're good. I pulled up a couch. That old couch looked pretty ratty, but I brushed all the trash off. So now we're ready. Like you mentioned, I do the same as you. I can't compost at home, so I joined a community garden. Just like you, mine is free. They do ask that once a month we do a voluntary work day. It's 3 hours. I get to meet some people from my community. It's about 3 blocks away. It's great. No, and all I did was Google community gardens near me and found a few of them. So, and I'm in the middle of DC. I guarantee you, everybody, wherever you are in New York or Chicago or Omaha, Nebraska, you probably have community gardens.
Yes.
But I think we were gonna go through it maybe for my parents, just to let people see how to use this diagram. So we didn't really plan on how to do it. Sarah, you want to ask questions, and I'll just answer. We'll go down the list.
Sure. So Kevin, your parents, can they compost at home? That would be a yes.
They do have a backyard, yes.
Right. So presumably they would like to utilize their yard. So they would like to be outside.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we would use that chart.
Okay.
And then, do you think that they would compost just kitchen waste or yard scraps, or?
Well, my mother doesn't cook much, but I think that this might spur her to start cooking more. So let's do kitchen and yard mix.
So kitchen and yard.
So we're going to move on to the next slide.
Okay, kitchen and yard mix. So that's on the left over here.
Here it is.
Now, would they want super simple?
They probably want super simple, but my father's going to give it a go anyways. Let's say no. They want to go all in. Yeah.
All right. So composting in the garden.
And what does that mean, in the garden?
Do you want to be able to utilize it in with what you're growing?
Let's say they don't have a garden, so no. Compost area.
Okay. So this is the thing. Are you worried about pests? So.
I don't think they are. No, they have a pretty big backyard. They can keep it out of the way. So
okay.
No.
Do they want to make something themselves, or do they want to sort of buy something and just have it one and done?
My father definitely wants to do it himself.
Okay, so that would be yes, and that would go to a wire bin, a cedar wood bin, concrete bin, upcycled pallet bin. Basically, there are lots of bin options, and the way that you construct it and structure it, there's tons of videos and tons of resources on Google on how to make composting bins. And so I encourage you guys, hopefully, I know this is overwhelming and this is a lot of information, and hopefully this doesn't deter you from looking up how you can do it yourself. We were trying to provide this to sort of have an easy little flow chart of how you can do things at home and what your capabilities are, but it really just depends on how much space you have, how much money you have to spend on it, and how much time you want to put into it. But there is a solution. I promise you there's a solution for everybody. So if you guys have access to this, or just Google flowcharts of composting, then you can figure out what system will work best for you.
I'll make sure this is available. There was also what she shared with me was a one-pager. This wasn't originally just one page to make it a little more easy. You guys will have access to that as well.
Yeah, we'll send that out.
Okay,
so
ready?
I want to show that these are some different ways of being able to compost. So if you want to move to the next slide. So this is probably what most of you are wondering the most, is what can I even compost and what can I not compost? Because, you know, when you think of food, there's lots of different types of food, and can everything go in there? What about things like paper towels or pizza boxes, things like that? And again, I wish I had like a really simple, easy answer for you all. But unfortunately, it's a matter of it depends on the type of system that you have and what you're worried about. So biologically, all organic material can be composted and will break down. But if you're worried about certain pests or rodents, things like that, then things like meat and dairy and oil can attract some of those things. So oftentimes when you see, if you go to your community garden, they will make it explicitly known what you can and cannot compost in their system. And so you want to, of course, honor that and make sure that you abide by the rules. But if you're doing home composting, again, it depends on the type of system that you use and what you're going to use it for. Now, if you guys see here on the bottom right, there is a cat in a litter box here, and I wanted to just highlight that I have a friend who specifically started a worm composting system in order to deal with, she's got 6 dogs and wanted to deal with her pet's waste because she lives by a river and she doesn't want their waste contaminating the water source. And so she started a worm bin specifically for pet waste, even though right here it says it's not compostable. And again, the reason is that if you're wanting to have a composting system and then use that compost in your garden, then of course you don't want to have pet waste in that composting system. But if you're just using that compost to just spread throughout the yard or on landscaping that is not food source landscaping, then that's perfectly fine to do. So again, when you see charts, honestly, the best thing to do is to just, if you have a question about something, is to Google it. You can ask Siri, you can ask Alexa, you can ask, there's lots of resources in terms of how you can figure out what is and is not compostable. So again, there's some sort of caveats. Because worms, while they can be used for pet waste, if you put onion skins or citrus in a worm bin, that actually the acid level can burn their skin. And so again, it depends on the type of system that you use. And I hope so much that is not a deterrent or too overwhelming to the point where it deters you from looking into composting. But it is just something to sort of to learn and to get involved in, and it will take effort. And that's just part of it. If you want to live sustainably and if you're wanting to be involved in this, it takes some education. And so I'm so glad that you're on this call to learn some sort of basics about it. And I hope that this will inspire you all to look further into it to make sure that you can do composting yourself at home.
I don't want to interrupt. Can I ask one question?
Go for it. Yeah.
In the same vein of not trying to intimidate people from this, what happens if a Honeycrisp sticker does end up in my composting pile?
Yes, Kevin, I'm so glad you asked that, because what you'll notice is that it can be very hard. It can be there. So I'll give you the example of the community garden that I compost in. When we go through and we turn it, and it goes through the different stages of evolution in how, in the degradation process. Ultimately, what happens is if you leave a sticker or something that is not compostable in the compost bin, the finished product will just have it sitting on the top of the it will sift out when you have the end product. And so it's not that bad things will happen to your compost if you have contaminants in there. But it'll just be left. It won't break down. And so what you can do is just sift them out, you know, throughout the stages, or even at the end, if you're unable to remove it from the beginning. So hopefully that will alleviate some concerns. Now, this is my sort of favorite topic, is talking about bugs and waste. And if you guys see the video on the top right that's playing, this is fish. On the left side is not cooked, and on the right side is cooked. And as you see, this fish is being broken down very, very rapidly. And this is time lapse, and so it's breaking down. And these are insects. These are native insects to North America, and they'll show up in your composting system depending on the type of system that you have, but they often just show up whether you want them to or not. And so I want to make sure that if anybody sees bugs that look like this in their compost system, don't freak out. They're actually going to really, really help your system work more efficiently. These insects are voracious consumers of food waste and organic material. And as you can see, this time lapse will go on. They devour these fish in about 24 hours. And so that's incredibly fast compared to traditional composting systems that often take months to fully break down. And so as you can see, what's left over here are just the bones, which can then be used for things like bone meal and things like that to be broken down. Now, what's cool is that the brown stuff that you see here is the frass. Now, that is a term for insect poop. That is the technical term for it. And what's neat about frass is that it can be used immediately as fertilizer. It doesn't require a curing time period that compost requires. And so this is just one option. Now this is sort of more difficult to do on like an in-home scale, but it can absolutely be done in an outside system, in various outside systems. And so just wanted to sort of whet your appetite in terms of some options of alternatives to landfills and alternatives to traditional composting, is that insects can do this and do it very naturally and do it regularly, sort of whether you want it to or not. And so exploiting that and capitalizing on that is something that we should be doing. And actually, the larvae themselves, this is fine to stay on this slide, the larvae themselves can also be used as fish meal, fish meal and chicken feed, things like that, and can actually be processed into biofuels and biodiesel themselves. That it's actually, if you process black soldier fly larvae for biofuels, it's actually more efficient than if you were to just process food waste for biofuels. And so it's they're amazing, and I think insects are awesome. And so if anybody wants to talk about that a little bit more, I'm happy to do that. And this slide just showcases that there are several different types of insects that break down food waste, but also some honorable mentions of different insects that can break down non-food waste as well. So as we discussed just before this, black soldier fly larvae can break down food waste. Cockroaches are actually being used in China to consume restaurant fats, oils, and grease waste. And dermestid beetles, also known as museum beetles or taxidermy beetles, can break down human carcasses as well as animal carcasses. They're actually what are used often in forensics, as well as in museums, to be able to preserve skeletons that are very delicate, because they do this very efficiently and very cleanly. Now, roly-polies, as you see on the bottom right, they are often found in compost bins, and they actually extract heavy metals like lead from compost and from the soil. So they're amazing. And mealworms can process, they possess an enzyme that breaks down styrofoam. And I actually have mealworms myself that I sort of farm and raise. Not only for styrofoam degradation, but mealworms, and I keep these separate, but mealworms are also a very nutritious source of food for humans. And so I'm happy to talk, maybe that's for another another session if you guys want to talk about entomophagy, which is eating insects. That's sort of a whole other thing. But ultimately, insects have a lot of different applications. They're not just things that we should be killing off with pesticides and sprays. They actually have a wonderful use in this environment and in our ecosystems. And so, lastly, waxworms can also break down plastic. So just wanted to sort of showcase here that insects are incredible and can be utilized for wonderful waste management, but also for a lot of other applications. And so again, maybe that's a conversation for another time. And I would love to talk with whoever is interested in having more of these conversations. My contact information will be provided, and feel free to contact me. So with that, I think Kevin is going to go over how you guys can do this through Capgemini. So thank you guys so much for letting me talk.
Of course. Thank you, Sarah. And I think we've already decided that we're going to do how to consume insects for our next webinar. So everybody, awesome. keep your eyes open, because that's going to be the next one coming. Now, we're not done yet. We have a very exciting new pitch. Let me just switch slides. The social media challenge is the reason you guys are all here. This is very exciting. This is going to be a fun and interesting way for everybody to get started. And we're going to go over it here in the next few slides. So we did a lot of deliberation on how this is going to work. We decided that it's going to last 2 weeks. How much can you compost in 2 weeks? We're going to give you 1 week to prepare. There will be prizes, first, second, and third in 2 different categories. There will be weight per person, as well as weight per household. This is to help differentiate between those that are family houses of 4 or 5 and those of us living in studios. We want everybody to have an equal shot. It will center around a Teams page, which we'll go over later, but there will be extra points for reposting to LinkedIn or Instagram with the hashtag Capgemini Composts. Just to be clear, if you do have a private account on Instagram, be sure to let us know separately. You can either email or even just in your Teams post, make sure we know, or else we'll never be able to see it. And you get extra points for wearing your Capgemini swag, which I'm sure you all have plenty of. So this is what it looks like visually. Today is the 14th. We're going to give everybody that preparation week from the 15th to the 23rd. This is the time for you to decide on your method, research community gardens, research compost drop-off locations, purchase a bin. They're on Amazon, Home Depot, anywhere else. Just you can find them anywhere, and they're non-expensive and generally pretty. They're not ugly, so it's fine to keep them in your kitchen. And I know that Sarah just uses a piece of Tupperware. You can do whatever you like. And we're asking that people share pictures throughout this process. There will be extra points for that, just to spur creativity and help people know what it is they're doing, so that maybe they can get ideas on how they can compost most effectively. And then the compost challenge starts on the 24th. This is where you're going to go to the farmer's market and just clean house. We want to make sure that they know you by name by the end of this challenge, because you're going to go there and you're going to get all the veggies and all the fruits, and you're going to start cooking for your family. It's going to be great. Make sure to collect all of the compost that we mentioned before, the food scraps, the vegetables, the cardboards, definitely not the stickers, definitely not the bones, and note the weights, because at the end on 8/4, you're going to post a picture with your compost and comment on the final weight. That is how we're going to know how much you ended up composting over the 2-week period. You'll have to include either in the picture or in the post with your picture how many people in your household, and of course always Capgemini Composts is just a good way to spread the message. Here's the scoring system during the prep phase, which is today until the start. The first photo anybody posts will be 5 points. It's going to be the same per household or per person. The second photo and on, you'll get 3 points per post. So if you keep them on coming, you are going to score big. During the collection phase, it's even better. Your first photo is 10 points per post, and your second photo is 3 points per post. This is including the deadline. So if you only post once throughout this entire challenge, you'll get that 10 points per post. But the real crux of this will be throughout the challenge, you will get points per pound of compost. And now per household is going to be 10 points. Per person is going to be 5 points per pound per person. And I'm just going to have an Excel spreadsheet to consider people in both segments. And you'll either you'll win one or the other, but you will be competing in both. As I mentioned, sport Capgemini swag in the photo. That can be a sticker, that can be a hat, that can be a shirt. You will get an extra 3 points for that photo. And if you post it to LinkedIn or Instagram, you get an extra 5 points for that photo. And as I mentioned, if you're private, make sure that you let us know that. I included a picture here. That is my compost bin. It is just a piece of plastic that I got off the internet, and it actually came with this little mounting bracket underneath a drawer. So I don't even really ever see it. I just open that drawer, toss in my compost, put it back. I put a bunch of stickers on it. As you can see, that is a Capgemini sticker. So boom, there's extra points. It is 5 pounds at the moment. That would be marked and weighed, and I would post this to the Teams page with the hashtag Capgemini composts and score big. This is some photos of your lovely hosts. This is me after a hard day's work in front of the camera, wearing my Capgemini hat, of course, and as well as this is Sarah feeding what looks like the angry furnace from the Home Alone movie. Sarah, do you want to tell us what's going on with this scary looking device here?
Sure. This is a compost tumbler that you can buy for your own home. And what's amazing is that so this bin, without any kind of prompting, has tons of black soldier fly larvae in it. They just show up, and it's amazing. So what my community garden does is we put all of our food waste in this compost tumbler, in with so this is green material, but it requires brown material. So we do sawdust or dried leaves. You can even do things like shredded paper. Now, sort of a caveat there is that depending on what you do, or like rip up Amazon cardboard boxes, things like that. Now, you do have to be concerned with certain contaminants, like depending on the type of ink that comes in there, or staples from from paper, or plastic from tape and things like that. So there's some different caveats there. But again, if you do have contaminants like that, then they just won't break down, but you can sort of sift them out later on, sort of reactively, if you want to do that. But yeah, I just encourage you to not be, I know insects are, a lot of people get creeped out, and I saw real quickly in the chat, people were, skin was crawling, about, insects and things like that. And I know that it can be a hard mindset to get over, but especially if you have kids love bugs. And this is a great, sort of a great thing to do with them, to get them more engaged, and to be more aware of, separating things out. What the importance of it is. It's a good learning opportunity for both you and them.
Very cool. Okay. So now the big reveal of the prizes. I'm really excited about these. I think you guys are going to like it. The first and second place come from this company called Blueland, where they come in these kits. The first one is going to be those 3 spray bottles and the 1 hand soap bottle. You fill it up with hot water, and then you put in those tablets. You can see the little tablets there. And there is your multi-purpose cleaner, your glass cleaner, your bathroom cleaner, and your hand soap, foaming hand soap, no less. And to refill it, all you do is go to Blueland and get more of these tablets, which are incredibly cheap, incredibly easy, and quick to send to your house. And you don't have to do those throwaway plastics anymore. So the first one is going to be a whole kit with those 4 bottles. The second one will be a kit with 2 of the hand soap bottles, different smell varieties, the iris agave, the lavender eucalyptus. These are all really, really cool. So I'm really excited about that. The third one as well is a little bit near and dear to my heart. It's a bag of Gorongosa coffee. Gorongosa is a national park and wildlife sanctuary in Mozambique, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And they started this coffee business where all of the proceeds go to the operation of the park, as well as a huge portion of it goes to educating Mozambican girls and women. So it's a really great program. And of course, even if you guys don't win, please check out these links. Go here. The coffee is great. It is not expensive. The refillable bottles are also very, very cool. And yes, before you ask, Sarah, all of the packaging material for these bottles is entirely compostable. So okay. I don't want to be...
Sometimes people like bioplastics, there's like iffy things going on there. But again, I'm so glad that you brought up the compostability of packaging, because it's sort of the idea that we're seeing more compostable products like corn-based cups and like silverware and things like that. but it's pretty irrelevant if it still ends up in a landfill. So again, it's the importance of separating out the compostable materials, the organic materials from our trash, and doing something productive with it. So I'm so glad that there's so many of you that are interested in doing this and participating. And real quick, I wanted to address a question that I saw in the chat about what do I do if my compost smells, because that is a very legitimate concern. And what that means is that you don't have enough brown material and enough carbon material in your compost. And so I would encourage you to add dried leaves, shredded cardboard, shredded paper, things like that. That will help to make sure that your compost not only doesn't smell, but that the balance is correct. Because if you have too much food waste in your compost bin, then all that's happening is it is rotting. It's no longer composting, it's just rotting. And so the way to balance that and to counter that is by adding more brown materials, which are things like dried leaves, paper.
Now, is that true for the big old compost bins in my community garden, or is that true in my tiny little kitchen bin here as well?
So that can be true for your kitchen bin as well. Now, for me and my sort of Tupperware that I keep, before I go and drop it at my community garden, sometimes it can smell. And, for that, to me, because I go every couple of days, I just put the lid on and then I don't have to deal with it. There are some little containers and bins that you can get that have charcoal filters on the top, on the lids, and that helps to eliminate smells as well. There's lots of things that you can do to sort of help reduce smells and things in your own kitchen. But the other solution is just to empty it more frequently.
All right, let's keep moving because we don't have too much time. So how do I join the challenge? Well, we're going to take a little bit of time right now and we're going to do it. I made it very visual for everybody. You guys are all on Teams right now. You click this Teams button here, you go down to join or create a team, and you search for CARES Composting Challenge. We can take just a few minutes for people to do that. Those of you that are in Capgemini Government Solutions with me, you don't have access to this Teams page, go ahead and send me an email. I want to gauge how many people are interested. If there's enough people, we can make a Teams page within our own Teams, or we can just do it all via email too. That'll work as well. But I just want to gauge what we're doing. And if you have questions on the North America side, Jake is your go-to person. He's on this call as well. Please reach out to him if you have any questions. I'll give just a few more seconds for people to do that. But in the meantime, our next segment is the scripted questions. So why don't we get started with that? First off is, let's see, you already answered that one. How will I know if my compost is not working?
So if your compost is not working, it will smell. There are ways that you can gauge whether your compost is working or not. You can buy thermometers that will indicate the temperature. And again, different composting will require sort of different levels of temperature to make sure that it's working correctly. But what that means is that if your compost doesn't heat up enough, then it won't break things down as efficiently. And particularly if you are worried about certain types of diseases and things, because you're going to be putting the compost back onto like your garden and things like that, then you want to make sure that the compost gets up to a sufficient temperature to be able to eliminate the concerns of that. And so if it's not working, it'll tell you because it will start smelling. So that's
okay. Interesting. Let's see. What resources beyond this webinar can people use to learn more and become involved?
Involved with composting or involved with?
I would say involved in knowledge collection as well as composting itself. Or that kind of leads into another question that was asked, was Seattle has compost pickup, just like their neighborhood garbage. They drive by and they pick it up every week. How can we expand that to other cities?
So there's things like that are being done, like here in Atlanta. San Francisco they already have it embedded into their municipalities. And honestly, the more people are asking for it, the more that it's gonna happen. If you demand it from your local officials, if you ask more questions in terms of seeing if the firms that you are involved in, if they, if they do composting. The firm here in Atlanta that does compost pickup, what they'll do is they'll basically provide you a container. You fill it up. They come every week or 2 weeks. It's a subscription. You do pay for it, just like we pay for our trash pickup. And some municipalities are getting wise to the fact that if you can, and making systems to where if you don't put your trash can out, then you don't pay for that week. And so that's a great alternative than rather than having to pay sort of this flat fee all the time, whether you have trash or not. We are seeing more shifts in policies and in regulations on how trash is being dealt with. And so, the more you can get involved with your communities, the more you can get involved in terms of asking your local officials about how things are being done. That's what's gonna help to stimulate some change.
Okay, let's do one more scripted question, and then we'll move on to the audience Q&A. So is food waste composting similar to the decomposition of animal meats?
It is. And again, depending on the system that you do, what's interesting with meat degradation, and actually what's heartbreaking of what's happening in terms of mass hog culling and things like that here in the States, of meat processing plants that can't handle the amount of meat that they have because they have a shortage of workers and things like that. They're having to basically just landfill, kill and dump all of these animals, which is horrible. These animals gave their lives, and they have a lot of energy and nutrients that is just being wasted by being buried in landfills. And so there are alternatives in terms of how those animals can be dealt with in terms of waste management. Insects is one way. Other vertebrates like vultures and things like that can help to break down bodies of animals in a much more sort of responsible, sustainable, and ecologically friendly way. And so the degradation of food waste is similar in terms of the USDA sort of suggestion for dealing with animal carcasses is to essentially compost them. But unfortunately, that's and that has to be done in a specific type of way to again make sure that there aren't disease transmissions and things like that. But again, through biomimicry processes of using animals and vertebrates, invertebrates, as well as composting, then that can be done in a much more efficient and safe way. So
very cool. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A. Anybody who has a question for Sarah, raise your hand and I will call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and give it to her. There we go. Amisha, go ahead.
Hey, so first of all, thanks, Sarah. I just feel like I've learned so much just in this past hour, and awesome. So excited to do this. And thanks so much for joining us. So my question is a little bit more like general. So a lot of us at CAP, especially right now with our goal, with our sort of company-wide mission to go carbon neutral by 2025, a lot of us are also observing how we can what action we can take to mitigate our own personal carbon footprint, not only just, on client work, but even just at home. And this is, really a part of that. So out of curiosity, if I were to, or if the average household were to compost all of their household waste in a year, how would that sort of net out with regard to their carbon footprint?
So there's various statistics on that, and I should have that more sort of on the tip of my tongue. But again, it sort of depends on the type of composting. If you're looking at individual versus household versus firm versus municipality versus country, there's lots of different levels of how you can measure that. And so unfortunately, I'm sorry, but I don't have a easy statistic for you at the moment. But it does significantly reduce carbon footprints. What I personally like to advocate is composting at home or at this at the source of where the food waste is coming from, because if we just do centralized facilities, like if there's one composting facility that you're using and you have to drive your compost out to do that. So that an example is Georgia State University composts all of its campus food waste, which is fantastic, but they use a compost facility that is an hour and a half away. So, it's being driven out to be composted, and it's sort of, you wonder, are we negating the carbon footprint that comes from composting by driving it out there? And so I'm a very, very firm advocate of decentralizing our waste management activities and basically doing it, we as consumers, what the majority of the food waste that comes out of from the United States is through consumer level, household level. And so if we're able to do composting, even on a community level, that's still going to significantly reduce our carbon footprint, not only through the composting of the waste itself and diverting that away from landfills, but also in the transport of that to and from different facilities. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
All right, thanks for answering.
Well, we had somebody raise their hand, but I think that they may have left. Does anybody have any more questions for Sarah? We have 2 minutes left, so I think we've done pretty well, but there's definitely time for more. If anybody has anything else, one more thing. No? Okay. Well, Sarah, I have learned a ton. This has been awesome.
This was so much fun. Thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Contact information is on the screen. Sarah is more than happy to discuss any of this with you. This is her website. This is her email. As I mentioned before, here's me. Here's Jake for those of us that are in Government Solutions or CAP North America. Thank you so much for joining. Quick shout out to the Design Center of Excellence for helping to make the slides for today's session. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope everybody learned anything. And please participate in the challenge. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to collect a lot of compost, and I think you'll find that it is easier than you expect and fulfilling. So
I can't wait to see y'all's pictures.
Yeah, it'll be great. Thanks everybody for joining, and have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.